Hello, everyone, and welcome to our show. Hello, Leslie, and hello, Judie. So I'm going to start with Judie for 1 second. Judie Oron, the author of Cry of the Giraffe. First of all, welcome, because you've been here many times before.
Thank you again for inviting me. Always appreciate the support.
My pleasure. Leslie Starkman. So,
Hi.
Leslie, before we start talking about this beautiful exhibition, tell me a little bit about the Stephen Lewis Foundation.
So the Stephen Lewis Foundation. Well, it's a charitable organization, and its main mission is to raise funds to support grassroots projects in Africa that are working with people who are suffering from AIDS there in sub-Saharan Africa. So they're working with about 300 projects there, and they work with people who are either women, children, especially grandmothers and the grandchildren that they're raising, and that's kind of my connection to it, but also people who are actually suffering from AIDS. And they run all kinds of projects that are, again, funded and run by the people there. So that's really their mission. But it started from Stephen Lewis, who some of your viewers will know, but not everybody will know. He was appointed the United Nations Special Ambassador to Africa for AIDS. And he did a lot of touring there. And while he was there, he started to feel that, okay, we need to try to do something. So he came back, and he and his daughter started the foundation. Alana Landsberg Lewis started the foundation and, started to raise money to support various projects there. One of the things that they noticed as either they were visiting the projects or other people were visiting them, was that a lot of the people who were coming to these various small, tiny little projects for help and assistance were grandmothers. And they sort of couldn't figure out, why are all these grandmothers coming? What is going on here? And then what they realized was that the grandmothers were coming because they were the only ones who were left to take care of all of the children who had actually been orphaned by AIDS.
How sad.
It's very sad.
How sad.
And there are millions, literally millions, in Africa who are suffering that way. So they thought, well, okay, we have to start to do something here about these grandmothers. Let's find a way that we can help them, because many of them at that time, and we're talking about 2006 at this time. So many of them, really didn't have enough food for their grandchildren. They didn't have enough money for clothing. In almost all of Africa, if you want your children to go to school, you have to pay school fees, you have to pay fees for children to wear uniforms. They were basically just not able to
Well, I guess
manage
there were
anything.
also grandmothers that, they've already raised their children, and then to go back to work or whatever to raise the money to raise their grandkids. So it's not an easy job. They're not 20 years old anymore.
Exactly, they're not 20 years old. Yeah. And many of them were already in ill health, didn't have safe places to live in a lot of cases. So anyway, they decided that they were going to start to try to work with the grandmothers. So in 2006, they invited a number of African grandmothers to come to the World AIDS Conference that was being held here in Toronto.
Nice.
And at that time, there were some women, grandmothers, but also grandothers, so people who were just involved and interested in what the foundation was doing, who sort of acted as hosts for some of these African grandmothers. And I unfortunately wasn't able to go to that conference. I was out of the country at the time. But people that I know were involved with it. And so at the end of the conference, because these women were so unbelievably inspiring, they came and they had nothing. Many of them had never actually been outside their own villages, and now they were in Toronto. Yeah. But people were so inspired by them and by what they were going through, and also by their amazing courage. And African women, so they're just unbelievable, right?
Right.
So they decided that, or a number of these people decided that they were going to start grandmother groups. So as I say, grandmother and grandother, but they're called grandmother groups.
Okay.
To try to support the work of the foundation. So that was in 2006, and the group that I belong to, which is called Toronto Grandmothers Embrace, we started at that time. But now in Canada, there are 240 groups.
Wow.
There are 150 in Ontario.
Wow.
5,000 women and some men, but mostly women, in Ontario who are involved in the group, and we've now raised $21 million for the Stephen Lewis Foundation.
Wow.
So that's impressive.
It is very impressive.
On the other hand, there are also millions of grandmothers. So, we're talking about probably $2 per person. It's still tragic. It's still critical.
Wow.
But the foundation continues its work, and the campaign continues its work. And so Creating Futures is really sort of coming out of that campaign. It's called the Grandmothers to Grandmothers campaign.
Wow.
And so that's really where this is coming from.
So let's talk a little bit about this beautiful pamphlet. I mean, everybody will get to enjoy some of the photos, but this is amazing, really amazing. Threads of Hope.
Creating Futures, Threads of Hope.
Yeah, African Grandmothers. Beautiful. Tell me, how did this come about?
Well, this booklet is actually from the exhibit itself. And the exhibit is a show of 29 pieces of fabric art that were done for a grandmother's group in Waterloo, Ontario called Oma Siskona. And they decided that they would really like to mount a show like this. There are a couple of groups in British Columbia that did a similar kind of thing, and this started because, well, this is sort of another whole story to talk about, but when I was in South Africa with the Stephen Lewis Foundation in 2010, there were 42 Canadian grandmothers who went, and so we met grandmothers from all across Canada. And so there was a great connection by the woman who was the head of this Oma Siskona's group, and her name is Hilary Walsh. She met some of the people from Vancouver and they had done, or BC, and they had done some of these things. So she decided, okay, we can do the same thing. We have great skills here in Ontario too. So they invited people that they knew, some fabric artists and some members of their grandmother's group who are just fabulously talented, to create pieces of fabric art that could then be, they asked them to donate the pieces so that they could put on a show that would ultimately be auctioned off as a fundraiser for the Stephen Lewis Foundation. So that's what this is. This is the pamphlet for that show.
Beautiful.
So it was on exhibit in the City of Waterloo Museum during the summer, and then it's gone on tour in Ontario. So it's coming to Toronto at the end of February, and that's kind of how we connect to it.
So can you tell us when and where?
It's going to be at the Miles Nadal Jewish Community Center. It starts on February 25th, and it'll run until March 9th.
Okay.
So it's just a tiny window.
But it'll give everybody a chance to go see it. Beautiful, beautiful pieces. I think everybody should take the time and just go see it and appreciate it.
The exhibit is free.
Yeah.
And there'll be 2 events at either end of the exhibition on February 25th. Leslie can speak more about that. And then another large event on March 8th, which is International Women's Day. So that really
speaks to my heart.
Yeah, absolutely. And that one's going to be an important one too. But I just want to say we felt so grateful to the JCC for kind of sculpting a space when we could get the exhibit, because we didn't have very many options. There weren't very many sort of openings in the tours traveling schedule.
Okay.
And so I kind of went to the JCC and said we would love to have it here. And they said, well, okay, we'll kind of make a little bit of elbow room and find a space, and it's fantastic that it's going to be in the gallery there.
Can you tell us where? Like which JCC?
It'll be at the Miles Nadal. It's Spadina and Bloor.
Okay, perfect.
So right in the gallery, it's right off the lobbies, all totally accessible.
Beautiful place. It's a
great long hours.
Yes.
I mean, I think it's on 9 to 9 during the week and 9 to 7 on the weekends. So people will have a chance to see it.
Judy, can you tell me how did you get involved and why did you get involved, and your thoughts about this?
Good question. I'm new. I joined in September purely by chance. I was doing a talk at a school.
Excuse me. There's no such thing as by chance.
I am becoming aware of that fact.
Okay.
You've pointed that out, and I'm beginning to agree. So I was doing a talk at a school, and there was this lovely child who had so many questions at the end of my talk about Cry of the Giraffe. And then
a week later, I got an email from his grandmother,
Oh.
who said that he had just one more question. Would it be terrible if she emailed me and asked? And I said, fine, no problem. I answered the question. And we started emailing back and forth. And this was Joanne Page, who it turned out was one of the very early grandmothers who got involved and who was one of the people who started the Toronto Grandmothers Embrace chapter. So I got curious, and she said, come to a meeting. And I came to a meeting. I walked into a room with white-haired ladies my age and younger, quite younger, some of them.
Not all white-haired.
Well, some of them should have been white-haired.
This is true.
And I just fell in love with the group. You see commitment, dedication, a really close connection, emotional connection with being a grandmother and with the grandmothers in Africa who are struggling to deal with this. And I saw a further connection because my work has been very much about Ethiopia and about child slavery there.
Right.
So if you talk about conditions for women, for young girls in particular in Ethiopia, and you talk about slavery, bride kidnapping, child early marriage, trafficking, the whole gamut of the horrible things that you would want to have happen to your child, well, AIDS is very much a factor in that. Mm-hmm. And the death rate, I believe, will go up from HIV. And so for me, the connection was very strong. And from some of the grandmothers that I've met in Ethiopia, these are women who are very powerful. And I'm hoping, though, that the projects that Stephen Lewis Foundation has in Ethiopia will spread, hopefully thanks to this exhibition and the support that we will get. And speaking of support, if you don't mind, I'm making a pitch.
Not at all.
I'm an Israeli. I know I don't sound like one, but I am very much one. I've spent most of my life in Israel. Most of my kids and grandkids live there.
I spent most of my time here. I'm still an Israeli.
Right. And I just, the more I fell in love with this organization, the more I started thinking, we need Israelis here. This is an organization that is just tailor-made for the Israelis that I know, who love adventure, who love the idea of Africa and other exotic countries.
Love helping.
And who
just
love
to want to help.
And who are out there helping.
Yeah.
So I'm really hoping that this exhibition, and thanks to you, this interview, will bring in the Israeli community as sponsors, because this is an opportunity to approach a whole new audience.
Even if you're not a grandmother, you don't want to be a part of a grandmother, organization, just come for the exhibition. Just look at the beautiful painting. I believe there's cards for a lot of the paintings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are greeting cards.
And greeting cards,
programs.
And,
And my
there's a lot of where different people can support.
My secret wish is that we will ultimately have enough people from the Israeli community to start an Israeli grandmothers group, which I think would be amazing.
It will be amazing.
It would be very cool.
Yeah,
it would be cool, wouldn't it?
When you're talking, like, I'm not a grandmother, but all I can think of, is my kids, like, they're still home, but pretty soon, they'll all leave the house, and you want it's time, to enjoy sort of life. And it's nice to have grandkids. That's what I hear from people. But it's nice also to take the kids and say to the parents, now you can take them home. I've had enough. But this is not what's happening to those grandmothers. They have to sort of become the mothers again. When they've already finished their life, raising the kids, they have to raise again.
Right.
And so I can just imagine how hard that is.
And considering that they're many of them in very remote areas of Africa.
That's on top of it.
No skills, not good health.
So I'm saying that's on top of,
no marketable skills. Obviously, they have a lot of other skills.
It would be hard for a regular mother, grandmother, to raise, grandchildren. I mean, to really raise them, it would be very difficult even in today's, this country.
I'd love to hear from Leslie, because she actually was there looking at. Can you tell us a little bit about?
Yeah, I mean,
sorry to.
No, it's okay. You can go ahead and host. No problem.
Yeah, when in 2010, as I said, I was part of a group of 42 Canadian grandmothers and grandothers who were invited to go to the International African Grandmothers Gathering that was going to be held in Swaziland. So we stopped in Johannesburg first, and we visited some projects that Stephen Lewis Foundation was helping to fund there. And then we went to the conference, to the gathering in Swaziland. And when we were there, we must have met didn't meet every single one, but there were about 500 grandmothers there from all across sub-Saharan Africa, from different groups, different projects that were being funded. In part, I mean, the Stephen Lewis Foundation doesn't entirely fund any project. They're always part of other groups that are funding projects. But we met women there who were there to give workshops on all kinds of things. So, I mean, you think about, again, these women who, just as you say, many of them didn't have, sort of typical high levels of training. But nevertheless, they were there either to sort of testify to the struggle that they were going through or sort of how far they had come along in the journey. So there were workshops there on poverty, there were workshops there on domestic violence, because there is violence against grandmothers there, as inconceivable as that might appear to us.
Yeah.
Workshops.
One of the things that often happens is that when somebody's child dies, sometimes his land is taken away from him, and therefore the woman can't even grow food on the land.
Yeah, women would lose their land, the right to the house that they had lived in for their entire married life, sometimes when their husband had died.
Or when their children died.
Right. Yeah. So exactly. So some of the workshops also were on income generation projects. So I went to a workshop that was being run by some Kenyan women who were there. There was a facilitator and 2 women who had come from different projects in Kenya. And these were women who were, not highly educated at all, but they came and they told their story, and it was sort of a story of survival and a story also of thriving. So they had come initially to the projects really with broken hearts. I mean, these women had lost their own sons, their own daughters. They now had grandchildren from different families. It's not like, you're raising your grandchildren from one family. Sometimes you're raising children where you've got a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, a 15-year-old, and a 10-year-old from 3 different families. And maybe you're also raising children from your neighbor's family because there's no one left in that family. So they're putting together families that have unbelievable needs. They themselves don't have a lot of money or resources. Even though they raised their own children, they weren't raising them in these kinds of situations. They weren't raising traumatized children.
They were also younger.
Absolutely.
More energy.
Exactly. Yeah. So the women who were coming, they came and they talked about how when they first came to the groups, they basically just sort of came there to cry and to moan and to say, like, why didn't I die? Why am I the one who's left? But gradually, I mean, again, the sort of incredible power of women coming together, just as you talk about.
Absolutely.
But also I think there's like a special power of African women coming together. They're unbelievable when they're in a group. But they started to support each other, They sort of started to be able to express what they needed to express.
That's beautiful.
And they were able to sort of move on. And somehow get the power to thrive and as well as survive. But I'm realizing that I'm running out of time a little bit, and I really want to talk about an incredibly important event that's part of what we're doing. It's kind of somewhat at the tail end of the Creating Futures exhibit at the JCC. We are sponsoring and hosting an incredible event called Voices of Power, Grandmothers Creating the Future. And so it's going to be a program at the Al Green Theater on March 8th, International Women's Day, 2:00. And we've invited a number of speakers to come. So far we have a confirmation from Michelle Landsberg, who, again, some of your audience will know. She's a very well-respected feminist journalist and author here in Canada. She's also married to Stephen Lewis. And she's agreed to come and speak as one of our speakers. So we're going to have this, I hope, extremely inspiring program. And then we're going to be following that with a reception and a silent auction. And just to sort of return to the Creating Futures exhibit, some of the artists who donated pieces for Creating Futures are also going to either donate pieces for our silent auction, or they're going to be willing to do commissioned pieces for that. So it's going to be, again, an incredible opportunity for people to.
And that's on March 8th.
That's on March 8th.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
we also have in the auction a house in France.
That's true.
Wow.
And we have a speaking
house in
author.
People. Wow.
No, we're not selling the house.
A week's stay. A week's stay.
Gee, and I thought the whole house.
That's all right. It's pretty wonderful. And we have an offer for Judy to do a book group talk.
Beautiful.
To a special a book group.
So we only have a couple of more seconds. I just want to know if somebody wants to become part of their organization, part of, Grandmother to Go, what do they need to do?
Well, probably the most straightforward thing for everybody to do would be to go to the Grandmother's website. So it's www.grandmotherscampaign.org. And through that site, you can find a place where you can connect to a group in your region.
Okay.
And you can also donate to the foundation, too, which would be fantastic.
That's beautiful.
And if you want a more personal touch, you can call Leslie.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's without
and
saying.
She'll lead you through the process.
So I just want to say again, thank you so much for coming. And I'll be there for sure.
That's
and
perfect.
I hope some of our, Israeli Jewish community will join and will come, because I think it's I have no words. It's a wonderful and touchy thing that you guys are doing. Thank you.
Thank
you, Gila.
And I will say thank you to you for joining us today. And I will see you next week.